Well, in the continuing story of this weird GPU, we've got some new developments. So what is this? If you've been following my channel, I've been reporting on, apparently there was a AMD Radeon 6700 non-XT, and at first it wasn't even being called an RX 6700, and there wasn't a lot of info about this. But it was up for sale on the Sapphire website, so it was definitely a real thing. Well, now we actually have somebody got their hands on it and has run it through some benchmarks, so we can take a look at that. But also, it has been branded now with the RX in front, although the AMD listing for this is a bit different than the one we're seeing on sale from Sapphire. Mainly the power consumption, and it looks like it has slightly higher clock speeds. So yeah, this whole situation's a little bit weird, but it does seem to be officially acknowledged by AMD now, and is specifically listed as an RX, and the Sapphire website did go back and change it, so these are RX listings now. This doesn't appear to be being advertised or anything, but it does seem to be out in the wild. Now, what is this? How does it stack up? Well, again, the only benchmarks we seem to have right now are from Megasize GPU, who posted on Twitter with some GPU Z screenshots to show they actually had the thing, and then some TimeSpy performance. However, one thing to notice here is initially the scores were a bit low, but then they bumped up a bit after some new drivers were installed. There was apparently a driver with specific support for the RX 6700, and then the scores did go up a bit, and they did do it both with the default power setting as well as the max power setting. Now, what did they get? Well, according to this Video Cards article, the performance here seems to be about 7 to 10% faster than the RX 6650 XT, although keep in mind, this is that Sapphire model with a bit higher power draw and the clock speeds increased compared to what AMD is listing as their reference for this card, although there doesn't appear to be any reference models out in the wild that anybody can track down yet as of this point. Now, where does this fit in? Like, how does this actually work? So what I wanted to see then was, okay, how much room actually is there between a 6650 XT and between the 6700 XT? Because keep in mind that what we're looking at now is the non-XT. Well, it's looking like, at least according to this relative performance chart from Tech PowerUp, which is fairly accurate on average, that there's about a 12% performance gap there. So if this article is correct, that we're seeing about a 7 to 10% performance increase from the 6650 XT to the 6700 non-XT. Now keep in mind, this is just some random 3D Mark benchmarks posted to Twitter. This is not a full review. But that would kind of place it in the middle here between the 6650 XT and the 6700 XT. So there does appear to be some space here. Now, there are some interesting things about this model. One of them being the fact that it comes with 10 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, 10 gigabytes of VRAM is, 2 gigabytes more than we get on the 6650 XT, but also 2 gigabytes less than what we get on the 6700 XT. But honestly, I think 10 gigabytes is a great sweet spot there, and if that saves some cost on manufacturing the 6700 XT with that extra little bit of VRAM, perhaps that could help the price come down a little bit, and this could be potentially a cool card, again, depending on pricing, and there does not appear to be any kind of MSRP set here. So if I get my head out of the way on the pricing, that's kind of the big thing here, is what will this cost, because there's a $180 gap. Sorry, not 180, geez. There's an $80 gap between the 6650 XT MSRP and the 6700 XT MSRP. So I would imagine it would fall somewhere in between there, maybe at the like $430, $450 range. We'll see how greedy they get. As far as we can tell, this seems to basically be a rebranded laptop 6700 chip that is then in a desktop format able to have higher power draw and thus higher performance than the laptop version. And these, I think, were being sold as mining chips, but since that's difficult to sell, I think AMD is now basically allowing these to be sold as a desktop part. And I think that's the origin behind all of this, is to clear some stock of some laptop chips that had been repurposed as mining chips and are now being repurposed as desktop chips. But that's fine as long as the performance is good and the price comes in. That's going to be the big deal. Where is that price? Now, speaking of weird GPUs, Video Cards has continued to leak information about a potential GTX 1630. It was originally supposed to come out on May 31st, and then they pushed it back to June 15th, and now they're saying it's just a to-be-decided release date. Now, I don't think this is Video Cards just making things up, because they have been leaking what looks like official embargo timelines from press kits that Nvidia really does send out to people. But it looks like it's now been switched to the GTMK is available. That's the go-to-market kit being provided to board partners. But it looks like the on-the-shelf date has been adjusted to be decided, and same thing with marketing activity. And it looks like they're listing component shortages, problems securing the necessary components, not the GPUs themselves. Now, that's a bit interesting since GPU supply has been going up. I don't know if NVIDIA is actually just deciding this doesn't make sense right now. I don't know the reason behind this delay, but hey, I don't really know the reason behind that GPU. They also comment on RTX 4000 release dates. So videocards.com had originally cited their own sources for some release dates that were a bit earlier than what other outlets had been claiming, including WCCF Tech, which I reported on as well. WCCF Tech were also citing their own sources. Well, it looks like videocards.com has actually said that they wanted to confirm these release dates information with as many sources as possible first. And according to the latest information, so they're saying they've confirmed it with their own sources. I'm imagining they have people within the board partners who would be then updated by NVIDIA. That's just me kind of speculating on where these sources might be. But it sounds like the launch date has been delayed by a month from what they had been reporting. So they're thinking the RTX 4090 will actually be a September launch, with the 4080 coming in October and the 4070 in November. So that's what videocards.com is confirming with their sources. But again, these could be announced sooner, but these could also change, right? This is just what the current up in the air time frame seems to be with video cards sources. Now, this is interesting. There's thinking that AIBs now are expecting a price cut on 30 series cards. Now, NVIDIA has not confirmed that, but this is really interesting because it sounds like part of this delay might be a focus on selling as many RTX 3000 series graphics cards as possible before that 40 series launch. Again, I think a lot of huge orders went out for these cards from AIB partners when the prices were high and these sold out instantly and crypto prices were high. But now that the crypto prices have crashed and it seems like demand is also dropping, then they've got these large orders that they still need to sell through, and that'll be more difficult, I think, once the 4000 series launches. So that could all be factoring into this, and it would be really cool if we really did start to see a bit more of a price cut. We've seen prices come down, but still not to MSRP. Like, could we get a 3060 Ti for like $400? Could we get a 3070 for $500? It'd be nice to at least hit MSRP. It'd be even better to be below it. Now, some interesting stuff here from sisoftware.co.uk. So I think it's engineering samples of the upcoming Raptor Lake CPUs have been tested on their platform. So this is not like they have them ahead of time, but they've summarized some information that they've seen on the benchmarks released onto their platforms. And they're seeing that so far in this testing, which by the way currently has low clock speeds, because these are probably engineering samples that aren't up to the full clock speeds, but at these low clock speeds, they've seen In legacy ALU FPU tests, RPL, so that's the Raptor Lake CPUs, the next gen, 13th gen Intel CPUs, are showing a large 33 to 50% improvement over Alder Lake, even at the lower clock speeds on these samples that have been leaked. And then in heavy vectorized SIMD tests, RPL is seeing only a 5 to 8% improvement over Alder Lake. And again, these are at lower clock speeds. We're seeing large cache increases here, which could help in gaming. That'll be interesting to see. Anyway, I don't want us to read too much into this because this is not a full review, and this is just based on what has been leaked into their benchmark database from people who have these and have been testing them. Now, how about Intel GPUs? We're seeing the Intel Arc desktop GPU actually listed in a system that's kind of for sale. It's at least being marketed, and I think you could maybe pre-order it. There's still no pricing or shipping information at this time, and this is just in Asia. If you haven't got the memo, Intel is at least initially launching their Arc GPUs in Asia with OEM partners. So in pre-built systems, basically, in the Asian market. A lot of people are speculating that this is due to them kind of wanting to get them out in the wild, but also wanting to buy time to get their drivers sorted out. Now, this is the performance info that's listed on the advertisement, the website selling this. So I can't read any of these names, but I mean, that looks like an Overwatch character, doesn't it? Isn't that Mercy or something? Anyway, I think this is 1080p, but there's not a lot of info here. These aren't real benchmarks, but that's the kind of performance claims in these esports-ish sort of titles that we're seeing here. Now, it looks like, according to MSI, the graphics card here, the A380, remember A3 is the lower end series, but the 80 is the full version of that lower end chip. There would be further cut down ones. This full version would get 6 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory and the full 96-bit memory bus. So yeah, we'll see more cut down versions as well. Not a lot to say here other than I want these to actually launch, Intel. Now, in FSR 2.0 news, AMD has a blog post giving more information on further games getting this tested. Now, I think the biggest thing that FSR 2.0 needs is to be launching in more games, especially big upcoming titles, although we've seen it launching in God of War. That was great. The other thing is, I do want to see some further revisions. We've got 2.0. I'd like to see 2.1, 2.2. If you haven't checked it out yet, Digital Foundry did a fantastic comparison in God of War, looking at FSR 2.0 versus DLSS and versus the temporal upscaler in the game. And overall, FSR 2.0 does a good job, but it clearly has deficiencies in certain aspects, especially in motion and with certain transparencies, compared to DLSS. So it's certainly not at DLSS level yet, although it's much improved over FSR 1.0, and it's much improved over some of the just temporal upscalers that a lot of games have already. Now, if you want to get the full game list, Video Cards did a good job of summarizing the information in that blog post so we can see which games actually have it. We currently have Deathloop, God of War, and Farming Simulator 2022. We have the rest of this list, which had already been announced with support. And then the further games that is kind of new information with this post is Abyss World, Hitman 3, Rescue Party Live, Super People, and the Callisto Protocol. So we'll be excited to see more games getting this technology, and hopefully we see further iterations on the technology. Now, there's been on Twitter posted some information about Meteor Lake. Now, what is Meteor Lake? This is the 14th gen Intel, which would need a new socket, and this is expected in the second half of 2023. Now, we're getting some interesting, screenshots of the chip and its layout and design. Probably more interesting to me is some of the performance targets here. And again, this is a long ways off, so we'll see how it actually hits these. But they're looking at the Intel 4 summary, right? So they're going down to the 4 nanometer, Intel 4, whether that's nanometers, whatever. But Intel 4 versus Intel 7, which is what Alder Lake is produced on, they're expecting 20% or greater than 20% ISO power performance versus their Intel 7 technology. And 8VT offers additional 5% performance at high voltage. They're expecting 2 times high performance logic library area scaling versus Intel 7 and extensive use of EUV lithography for process simplification. The point here is that this isn't just talking about the architectural improvements of the 14th gen Meteor Lake, but what they're expected to get just from the process node shrink. So I think further architectural improvements would be on top of this. Now we're seeing they're also claiming that Intel 4 process features 2 times higher performance library area scaling, extensive use of EUV for process simplification. This is a lot of the same kind of thing I just saw, I guess, listed differently. And then we got some kind of shots of some of the details on that. I don't know if you guys can hear my kids playing in the background. We're on summer break now, so they're up and playing. They're usually pretty good about being quiet, but not always. While I film my videos. Now, one just kind of moving on to some software stuff. We're seeing that one of AMD's software engineers is creating a mod for Return to Castle Wolfenstein, offering full path tracing, which is quite interesting. And you can see the original versus path tracing here. Although I think this still needs a lot more development from what I've seen on it. That's kind of just an interesting little tidbit. In terms of other interesting game tidbits, we're seeing Forza Motorsport getting a demo. Now this is, you know, I'm interested in seeing some of the in-game ray tracing they're adding. Honestly, this looks very next-gen. The graphics here look fantastic. And apparently the ray tracing, I think, should be available on Series X, which means that you shouldn't need insane PC hardware, although, you know, what frame rate that's running at and resolution when it's on Series X hardware, who knows? But they kept saying Series X and Series S, so if they're managing to get this kind of performance on those consoles, that'll be really interesting to see, but we don't have PC specs yet. Now, we've also seen Starfield gameplay shown, and the main thing I've got to say about this one is I don't know if it's just the demo, but when I saw this in motion, it felt, this probably won't come through very well for you know, through my recording of this recording, but that frame rate looks really low, guys. I'm a little bit concerned what that might mean about the performance and specs of this game when running on PC hardware, let alone consoles, although it isn't coming out until next year, so there's plenty of time for some optimization. Now, speaking of specifications, we do actually have some system requirements out for some games, at least partially. So Scorn is an indie horror game coming out, and they have released PC requirements and release date, and it does require an SSD when you take a look at that. So we're seeing this on October 21st, and the minimum requirements here look pretty reasonable, with a pretty low-end CPU requirements, 8 gigabytes of RAM, not requiring 16, a GTX 1060, and it's even specifying the 3 gigabyte version should be able to get you into the game, but it does mention SSD required in the additional notes, even for the minimums. Whereas the recommended jumps up to still fairly modest, but higher end, certainly CPU requirements, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and an RTX 2070 for the recommended GPU. Now, they're not giving us information on what sort of gameplay, you know, what kind of performance, resolution, game settings that all of these are targeting. We're also seeing Saints Row PC requirements partially revealed. It's just the minimums, not the recommended. In the minimums here, they actually are telling us that this is just targeting 1080p 30 FPS. Now, these are the minimum settings, but it's not clear whether that's minimum graphics settings, although I kind of assume it would be. But it looks like you could at least get in the door with a pretty old Core i3 or Ryzen 3 and a pretty modest GPU as well. Although, again, 1080p 30 at probably extremely low settings, and we don't know what the recommendations are here. And Resident Evil 2 PC is actually getting its system requirements turned up despite having been up, the game's been out for a long time. And this is coming along with the next gen patch. So it looks like the PC version of the game will be getting patched in line with that next-gen patch as well, and the system requirements are bumping up a bit here from a GTX 760 or R7 260X up to a GTX 960 or an RX 460 after this patch. And it's looking like it's going from DX11 to DX12 for the minimum requirements and jumping up to Windows 10 to be a requirement. All right, guys, hopefully this was all interesting to you, and I hope you have an excellent day.